Part 1. The Lab and the Breakthrough. The basement level of the Apex Chemical Synthetics Research Facility did not feature floor-to-ceiling glass walls, polished marble reception desks, or floor-to-ceiling city views. Down here, 30 feet below ground level, the architecture was built entirely of reinforced poured concrete, exposed galvanized steel ductwork, and heavy fireproof doors. The air inside Bay 4 always carried the exact same chemical signature: a sharp mixture of glacial acetic acid, volatile silicone monomers, cured epoxy resins, and the bitter scent of stale, burnt machine coffee. For 3 continuous years, that windowless 40 by 60-foot room had been my entire world. While the executive 5th floor of Apex was paneled in dark imported walnut and fitted with custom acoustics to muffle the sound of high-stakes corporate negotiations, Bay 4 sat directly beside the building's primary chiller plant. It was filled with the perpetual, low-frequency hum of industrial refrigeration units, the soft hiss of localized exhaust hoods, and the rhythmic clicking of magnetic stirrers. My name is Dr. Alina Vance. I was the senior lead polymer chemist at Apex, although if you looked up my profile in the internal corporate directory, my official job title was listed simply as Staff Researcher Level 2. Above me on the corporate organizational chart sat Arthur Pendelton, the Vice President of Research and Development. Arthur was not a chemist. He held a degree in business administration from a prestigious university, wore $3,000 tailored wool suits, and spoke in a constant stream of polished corporate buzzwords. He was the specific brand of executive manager who routinely referred to complex molecular synthesis as leveraging technical synergies, and who saw no issue asking his lead scientists if they could double the speed of an endothermic chemical reaction simply by putting extra staff on the laboratory bench. For 36 months, my small team of bench technicians and I had been chasing what everyone in the chemical industry referred to as the holy grail of marine coatings: a non-toxic, zero-fouling silicone polymer. The global commercial shipping industry spent billions of dollars every single year on excess heavy fuel oil for one simple reason: ocean biofouling. The moment a steel container ship entered open salt water, barnacles, tube worms, macroalgae, and bacterial slime began adhering to the submerged metal hull. This biological growth created massive hydrodynamic drag. As a ship moved through ocean currents, that drag forced the vessel's engines to work significantly harder, burning through dozens of additional tons of fuel per day just to maintain standard cruising speed. For decades, maritime fleets had relied on copper-based anti-fouling paints. Those paints worked by slowly leaking toxic copper ions directly into the water column to poison marine organisms before they could latch onto the hull. But international environmental protection agencies were rapidly shutting down the use of heavy metal paints under strict new marine conservation treaties. The industry desperately needed a solution that was entirely smooth, completely non-toxic, and mechanically durable. Whoever solved the hull friction problem without violating international environmental law stood to lock down an exclusive market worth tens of millions of dollars. Apex's high-priority entry in this global commercial race was designated internally as Project SilcaShield. The core chemical problem with pure silicone coatings had always been straightforward. Standard silicone matrices were either far too soft, meaning ocean floating debris and harbor flotsam tore them to pieces within months of application, or they were far too rigid, meaning they cracked and delaminated under the massive structural flex of a 1,000-foot container vessel, slicing through heavy North Atlantic swells. The resolution to this balance lay entirely within the cross-linking catalyst. To create a silicone matrix that was simultaneously slick as ice and mechanically indestructible, you needed a specialized catalyst capable of bridging the chemical gap between organic flexibility and inorganic hardness. For 18 grueling months, Every single formulation we synthesized failed our baseline testing protocols. The test panels we mounted inside our high-velocity saltwater testing tanks cracked, turned cloudy, or completely dissolved off their steel backings within hours. Then came the long night of Tuesday, March 12th. It was 20 minutes past 11 at night. The main building was completely deserted, leaving Bay 4 bathed in the cool yellow glow of overhead fluorescent lights. The lab was totally silent except for the steady, mechanical click of the benchtop viscometer. I was running a final batch reaction, using a newly synthesized organometallic complex I had designated in my notes as Catalyst 9. Unlike conventional industrial catalysts that relied on heavy tin or expensive platinum, Catalyst 9 utilized a custom, modified amino acid backbone. The absolute key to the entire chemical synthesis was extreme thermal precision. The liquid reaction mixture had to be held at a precise temperature of 114.5 degrees Celsius for exactly 42 minutes, all while maintaining a continuous, uninterrupted gas purge of ultra-high purity nitrogen. The nitrogen was essential to strip away even the most minute traces of atmospheric moisture from the reaction vessel. If the internal reactor temperature drifted by even 2 full degrees in either direction, or if trace atmospheric humidity entered the chamber during synthesis, the amino acid chain would undergo an immediate and irreversible side reaction known as decarboxylation. That failure mode was particularly dangerous because it produced a degraded chemical compound that looked completely identical in color, viscosity, and appearance to the true catalyst. However, the resulting degraded chemical bonds would fail catastrophically the moment the cured polymer was subjected to sustained saltwater shear forces under ocean pressure. Standing over the reaction flask in my safety goggles and lab coat, I carefully adjusted the digital heater controls. I watched the digital readout settle precisely at 114.5 degrees, then verified the steady bubble rate on the nitrogen flow regulator. For 42 continuous minutes, I did not leave the side of the bench. I watched the digital monitors like a hawk until the reaction timer finally chimed. I drew a small 5 milliliter sample from the vessel, cooled it gradually inside a sealed desiccator chamber, and carefully applied a uniform 5-micron film to a clean structural steel test plate. I carried the coated plate over to our dynamic salt spray shear testing chamber, secured it inside the sealed housing, set the fluid velocity controls to simulate 22 knots of hydrodynamic ocean drag, and engaged the pump. At 2:30 a.m., the digital sensor readouts on the testing rig finally stabilized. I leaned closer to the monitor, barely daring to breathe. The measured surface friction coefficient read 0.004. It was slicker than wet ice sliding across polished Teflon. The physical adhesion measurement between the polymer and the raw steel plate was far above our maximum scale limits. Most importantly, after hours of continuous salt water bombardment, the chemical film showed absolutely zero signs of swelling, microcracking, or bond degradation. We had accomplished the impossible. SilcaShield-X was a complete reality. I sat back heavily in my lab chair, staring at the bright green data curves pulsing across the computer monitor. An overwhelming mix of exhaustion and absolute relief washed over me. 3 full years of 80-hour work weeks, missed holiday dinners, cold takeout meals, and endless failed attempts had finally yielded a true scientific breakthrough. Following standard laboratory safety procedures, I immediately saved the complete raw spectral files and raw sensor readouts onto my dedicated, company-issued encrypted backup drive. Then, I pulled out my blue leather lab notebook, a heavy, thread-bound book I had kept with me since my graduate school days, and handwrote the full, exact reaction parameters, thermal curves, and nitrogen flow rates across pages 140 through 142. Finally, I opened the corporate R&D network terminal and began compiling the official internal patent disclosure draft. Because I understood the realities of industrial intellectual property protection, I acted with standard professional caution. In the public internal corporate document, I documented the overall chemical formulation of SilcaShield-X in thorough detail, but I purposely generalized the specific operational synthesis parameters for Catalyst 9. I described the catalyst complex broadly as an amino acid-derived organometallic structure, synthesized within a general temperature envelope between 100 and 130 degrees Celsius. It was standard legal protocol across the entire industrial chemical sector to keep exact, narrow trade secret parameters protected until corporate legal counsel formally filed priority paperwork with the international patent offices. I powered down the fume hood, locked my blue leather notebook securely inside my lower desk drawer, slung my leather satchel over my shoulder, and stepped out of Bay 4 into the quiet night. I had no way of knowing that within 72 hours, my 3 years of hard work would be stolen out from under me, and I would be forcibly escorted off the premises by armed corporate security. Part 2. The Executive Ambush. The summons came down to Bay 4 on Friday afternoon at 2:15 p.m. It was not an automated calendar invite or a polite note from Arthur's administrative assistant. It was a direct desk phone call from Marcus Vance, no relation to me, though he frequently made tired corporate jokes about us sharing a family tree. Marcus was Apex Chemicals' senior corporate HR director. "Dr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice thin and clipped through the earpiece. "Bring your laptop, keycard, and security tokens to Executive Conference Room 5B immediately. Mr. Pendelton and legal are waiting." I frowned, looking down at my safety goggles resting on a stack of rheology printouts. "Is this regarding the patent disclosure packet I uploaded yesterday? I am in the middle of calibrating a viscometer for—" "Now, Dr. Vance," Marcus interrupted cold. "Executive committee business." The line went dead. A sudden, sharp knot tightened in the pit of my stomach. In industrial corporate research, an unexpected afternoon summons involving both HR and legal never signaled a promotion. I grabbed my leather satchel out of habit, slung it over my shoulder, and took the freight elevator up to the 5th floor. The transition between levels was stark. Ground floor labs smelled of solvents, noise, and hard manual labor. The 5th floor was carpeted in plush charcoal wool, smelling of expensive espresso, floor polish, and executive authority. When I opened the heavy glass door to Conference Room 5B, 3 people were seated around a polished mahogany table. Arthur Pendelton sat at the head of the table. To his right was Marcus, holding a thick manila folder. To his left sat a woman in a crisp navy blue tailored suit whom I recognized immediately, Julia Sterling, Apex's chief intellectual property counsel. None of them offered a greeting. None of them offered a seat. "Sit down, Alina," Arthur said smoothly, gesturing to a solitary chair opposite them. I sat, keeping my satchel firmly on my lap. "What is going on, Arthur? Is there an issue with the SilcaShield disclosure draft?" Arthur did not answer right away. He opened a leather folder in front of him, slid a printed document across the table, and folded his hands. "Alina," Arthur began, adopting a tone of rehearsed executive solemnity. "Over the past 48 hours, an internal security audit was conducted on our R&D digital repositories following your patent submission." I blinked. A security audit. Julia Sterling took over, her voice dry and icy. "Dr. Vance, as lead scientist on Project SilcaShield, you were tasked with documenting the complete chemical synthesis pathways for company intellectual property. However, our forensic software flagged several critical omissions in your technical upload." "Omissions?" I laughed slightly, incredulous. "I uploaded 70 pages of comprehensive formulations. I generalized the specific trade secret windows for Catalyst 9 because it is standard legal practice to protect those exact thermal parameters until we secure international priority dates." That was not your call to make, Dr. Vance, Marcus chimed in, opening his folder. Furthermore, digital logs show you executed 3 unauthorized downloads of raw material data to an external encrypted drive earlier this week. I stood up from my chair, my voice rising in anger. That drive is my official company backup drive for raw spectral data. I was running off-site stability simulations on the lab server. What is this nonsense? Sit down, Alina, Arthur said sharply, his polite demeanor vanishing instantly. We know what you were doing. What I was doing? You knew Vanguard Maritime was opening an $85 million coding contract next month, Arthur said, leaning forward, his eyes cold and hard like 2 steel rivets. You knew SilcaShield-X was the crown jewel. You intentionally withheld the precise catalyst synthesis protocols from the corporate master server so you could leverage them during your upcoming compensation review. Or worse, take the trade secret to a competitor. I stared at him, stunned into silence. Are you out of your mind? I spent 3 years of my life 80 hours a week in a windowless basement, creating this technology for Apex. I protected the catalyst parameters because the compound is thermally volatile. If your plant scales it up incorrectly without thermal nitrogen purging. Save the technical lecture for someone who cares, Dr. Vance, Julia Sterling cut in smoothly. Under Section 4, Paragraph B of your Employment and Proprietary Rights Agreement, all inventions, chemical formulations, processes, and trade secrets developed during your employment are the complete and exclusive property of Apex Chemical Synthetics. I know what the contract says, I snapped. Then you know, Arthur said softly, picking up a pen, that as of 2:30 p.m. today, your employment with Apex Chemical Synthetics is terminated for gross breach of corporate compliance and intentional withholding of company assets. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the subtle, low hum of the 5th floor air conditioning. Terminated, I whispered. Effective immediately, Marcus said, pushing a second document toward me. This is your severance waiver. You will receive 0 severance pay due to termination for cause. You are under a strict 2-year non-compete clause across the entire chemical coating sector. You will surrender your keycard, corporate laptop, and access badges now. And if I refuse to sign? Julia Sterling smiled a thin, cold smile. If you refuse, Apex will file an immediate federal civil lawsuit against you for corporate espionage and attempted theft of trade secrets. We will freeze your assets, contact your academic references, and ensure you never set foot in an industrial research laboratory for the rest of your life. I looked from Julia's predatory smile to Arthur's impassive, calculated eyes. In that single, clear moment, the entire picture revealed itself with terrifying clarity. This was never about a security audit. This was a corporate takeover. Arthur did not want a lead scientist demanding credit, royalties, or a seat at the executive table when the Vanguard Maritime contract went through. He wanted the $85 million deal. He wanted sole credit for steering the R&D division to victory. By framing me for corporate misconduct, he invalidated my stock options, wiped my name from the primary inventor line on the executive pitch, and seized the company's biggest asset in one clean motion. My laptop is right here, I said quietly, my hands trembling slightly as I reached into my satchel. Slide it across, Marcus said. I pulled out my corporate laptop and pushed it across the table. Next went my security keycard and my building badge. What Arthur, Julia, and Marcus failed to realize, what none of them even thought to ask about, was the heavy blue leather notebook sitting securely at the bottom of my satchel. To them, science lived on cloud servers, hard drives, and digital files. To a corporate manager like Arthur, if it was not on a digital spreadsheet or a PDF, it did not exist. Am I allowed to collect my personal belongings from Bay 4? I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat. Security Officer Higgins is waiting outside, Marcus replied. He will escort you down, supervise you packing 1 box of personal desk items, and escort you off the premises. You have 15 minutes. Arthur leaned back in his chair, tapping his Mont Blanc pen on the desk. It is a shame, Alina. You were a brilliant chemist, but you forgot the most basic rule of corporate life. The scientist does not own the cage. I stood up, adjusting the strap of my satchel over my shoulder. You are right, Arthur, I said, looking him dead in the eye. The scientist does not own the cage, but you forgot something even more basic. Arthur looked up, raising an eyebrow. And what is that? You do not own the chemistry. Part 3. The aftermath and the second engine. Security officer, Higgins stood 2 paces behind me as I packed my desk inside Bay 4. He was a retired municipal police officer who looked genuinely uncomfortable having to guard a soft-spoken chemist carrying cardboard boxes. I placed my ceramic coffee mug, my desk lamp, a framed photograph of my late father, and 2 textbooks into the brown box. I did not touch the corporate computer tower. I did not touch the backup drives resting in the lab lockbox. That everything, Dr. Vance? Higgins asked quietly, his eyes lingering on the empty fume hood where I had spent hundreds of midnight hours. That is everything, Higgins, I said. He escorted me through the rear service exit, avoiding the main glass lobby entirely. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me with a solid, echoing thud that sounded like a vault ceiling shut. Outside, a light gray rain was falling over the industrial park. I stood on the damp asphalt carrying my single box of desk items, my satchel slung across my chest. The rain soaked through my wool coat within minutes, but I barely felt the cold. My mind was spinning with a mixture of raw betrayal and cold, analytical rage. I drove back to my small rented apartment in downtown Columbus, set the cardboard box on the kitchen table, and sat down in the silence of my living room. For the first 4 hours, I did nothing. I stared out the window as the afternoon rain turned into a dark, stormy evening. Arthur Pendelton thought he had executed a flawless corporate mugging. He had my laptop, my company badges, my server logins, and my stock options. He had legal counsel ready to threaten me with financial ruin if I spoke to the press or approached a competitor. At 8:00 p.m., I pulled my leather satchel onto the table and unzipped the main compartment. I lifted out my blue leather lab notebook. I opened it to page 140. There, written in my neat, precise hand using archival black ink, was every single step of the synthesis process for Catalyst 9. The exact molar ratios, the specific organometallic precursors, the precise heating ramp times, and most importantly, the hard technical warning on page 142. I read my own handwriting aloud into the quiet kitchen. Warning: reaction temperature must be held rigidly at 114, 5 degrees C under continuous ultra-high purity nitrogen purge. Thermal drift exceeding +2, 0 degrees C or exposure to ambient humidity will induce rapid decarboxylation. The resulting degraded compound, Catalyst 9B, appears physically identical, but suffers complete mechanical failure under marine shear stress. I closed the notebook with a soft thud. A slow, quiet smile spread across my face. Arthur Pendelton only had the generalized corporate disclosure draft I had uploaded to the network server 48 hours prior. That draft listed the synthesis temperature broadly between 100 and 130 degrees Celsius, and it made no mention of the mandatory nitrogen purging protocol. To an inexperienced manager like Arthur, who viewed chemical manufacturing as nothing more than turning valves and increasing production speed, the generalized draft looked like a complete, turnkey recipe. He was going to take that incomplete recipe straight to the production engineers at Apex's primary manufacturing plant in Ohio. He was going to tell them to run the reaction fast, hot, and cheap so he could hit his quarterly metrics and secure the Vanguard deal. Arthur had stolen the lock, but I had kept the combination. 2 weeks passed in relative silence. I spent those 14 days consulting with a top-tier employment attorney named Sarah Lynn. Sarah reviewed my termination paperwork, the severance waiver I had refused to sign, and the non-compete clause Arthur had tried to weaponize against me. Her assessment was immediate and decisive. They terminated you for gross misconduct without offering a formal internal hearing or producing verified digital evidence, Sarah explained over coffee in her office. Under Ohio labor law, because Apex fired you for cause without severance, and because they actively attempted to enforce a non-compete that deprives you of your livelihood without compensation, their non-compete agreement is entirely unenforceable. Furthermore, their legal threats were an act of bad faith intimidation. You are legally free to work for whoever you choose. That afternoon, I made a single international telephone call to London. The call was to Dr. Alastair Finch, the Vice President of Research and Development at Marine Coatings International, MCI. MCI was Apex's largest European competitor, a multi-billion-dollar maritime chemical firm known for rigorous engineering and strict technical standards. Alastair had tried to recruit me 2 years prior at an international polymer symposium in Zurich. When I told him I was available and completely clear of any valid non-compete obligations, he booked me on a first-class flight to London the very next morning. The meeting took place in MCI's flagship laboratory, overlooking the River Thames. I did not bring Apex's proprietary data. I did not offer them Catalyst 9. Doing so would have given Arthur's legal team a genuine pretext to sue me for trade secret theft. Instead, I sat down with Alastair and his senior technical board and presented an entirely new theoretical approach, a second-generation polymer architecture that built upon the fundamental chemistry I had spent my entire academic career studying. Catalyst 9 was a baseline proof of concept, I told Alastair, laying out my fresh hand-drawn molecular diagrams across his desk. It was thermally sensitive and required extreme process control. What I am offering MCI is Aegis Hydro, a self-stabilizing dual-catalyst matrix that operates at standard ambient pressures, requires zero nitrogen purging during scale-up, and delivers a friction coefficient 20% lower than anything currently on the global market. Alastair looked at the molecular structures, then looked up at me with sharp, intelligent eyes. How fast can you synthesize a master batch, Alina? Give me a lab, 4 competent bench technicians, and 6 weeks, I replied. Alastair stood up and extended his hand. Welcome to MCI, Dr. Vance. You start on Monday. MCI immediately set me up as the head of a dedicated research unit inside their North American Technical Center in Pittsburgh. They provided me with a state-of-the-art facility, brand new glass reactors, advanced mass spectrometers, an automated rheology bay, and a team of 4 brilliant young chemical engineers who listened to every word I said. We worked 16-hour days, but the environment was night and day compared to the toxic basement of Apex. There were no corporate buzzwords, no short-sighted business managers demanding we skip safety checks, and no Arthur Pendelton hovering over our shoulders. By the middle of April, my team had successfully synthesized the first 50-gallon batch of Aegis Hydro. The material was magnificent. It cured into an ultra-thin, crystal-clear film that was mechanically tougher than glass and smoother than wet ice. While my team in Pittsburgh began setting up full-scale production testing, I kept a quiet eye on the industry trade journals and financial press releases coming out of Chicago. On April 28th, Apex Chemical Synthetics issued a massive global press release. The headline read, Apex Chemical announces breakthrough contract with Vanguard Maritime Group, appointment of Arthur Pendelton as Chief Technology Officer. I sat at my new mahogany desk in Pittsburgh, drinking fresh coffee, and read the article. Arthur had landed his dream deal. Vanguard Maritime had signed an exclusive $85 million contract to coat their entire next-generation fleet of container megaships with SilcaShield-X. The article included a photograph of Arthur standing on a dock in front of a massive steel ship hull, wearing a hard hat and smiling broadly for the cameras. The article credited Arthur personally with overseeing the revolutionary R&D process that had produced the polymer. I folded the newspaper, set it down, and looked out the window at the Pittsburgh skyline. Arthur had taken the bait. He had taken my generalized draft, skipped the trade secret synthesis checks, and handed the flawed formula straight to Apex's manufacturing plant to meet Vanguard's aggressive delivery schedule. The countdown had officially begun. Part 4, the factory floor disaster. The press release was only the beginning of Arthur Pendelton's victory lap. Within 48 hours of announcing the Vanguard Maritime deal, Arthur was promoted to Chief Technology Officer of Apex Chemical Synthetics. He took over the massive corner office on the 5th floor, complete with floor-to-ceiling glass paneling and a private espresso bar. In corporate trade journals, Arthur was hailed as a visionary executive who had streamlined Apex's bloated research division and delivered an $85 million commercial triumph in record time. 400 miles east. Inside Apex's primary chemical manufacturing plant in Canton, Ohio, the reality was anything but triumphant. The Canton facility was a massive, sprawling complex of stainless steel piping, multi-story distillation towers, and heavy industrial storage tanks. The heart of the plant's specialty batch production was Reactor Hall 3, managed by a veteran chemical engineer named Jim Kozlowski. Jim was 58 years old, wore grease-stained coveralls over a tired work shirt, and had spent 34 years running high-pressure chemical reactions for Apex. He knew the sounds, smells, and vibration signatures of every pump and boiler in the building. On the morning of May 4th, Jim stood on the steel catwalk of Reactor Hall 3, holding a stack of newly issued manufacturing orders marked with bright red urgent executive directive stamps. Behind him sat Vessel 402, a 2,000-gallon glass-lined industrial reactor vessel equipped with heavy steam heating jackets, high-torque mixing impellers, and digital telemetry feeds connected to the main control room. Standing beside Jim on the catwalk was a young junior executive named Gregory Vance, no relation to me, but an eager corporate ladder climber sent directly from Arthur Pendelton's 5th-floor team in Chicago to oversee production scale-up. "This batch sheet doesn't make any sense, Gregory," Jim said, tapping his thick finger against the printed manufacturing sheet. "This is a brand new organometallic matrix. You're asking me to scale a laboratory synthesis straight up to 2,000 gallons without a pilot plant run." Gregory checked his gold wristwatch, looking thoroughly annoyed. "Mr. Pendelton personally authorized this batch protocol, Jim. The Vanguard ships are entering dry dock in Norfolk next week. We need 80,000 gallons of SilcaShield-X batch mixed, quality tested, and loaded into shipping totes by the end of the month." "Look at these thermal specs," Jim argued, pointing to the heating parameters. The laboratory disclosure document listed a synthesis envelope between 100 and 130 degrees Celsius, but there are no thermal hold curves here, no ramp rates, and where is the nitrogen purge spec? "Nitrogen purging slows down batch turnaround times by 12 hours, Gregory replied flatly, resting his hand on the catwalk railing. "Ultra-high purity nitrogen gas costs $4,000 per run on a vessel this size. Mr. Pendelton ran the cost-benefit analysis at corporate headquarters. The reaction proceeds just fine under standard atmospheric venting. We set the reactor jackets to 128 degrees Celsius to maximize reaction velocity and finish the batch in 6 hours instead of 18. Jim stared at the young executive in disbelief. "You can't just crank the heat to 128 degrees on a modified amino acid complex without verifying thermal stability. If this polymer undergoes a side reaction under heat, the whole matrix could degrade." "Jim," Gregory said, his voice dropping into a stern executive tone. The R&D division under Mr. Pendelton spent 3 years perfecting this formula. The chemical structure is set. Your job is not to re-engineer the polymer. Your job is to run the reactor, hit the volume targets, and make sure we don't miss our shipping window. If you can't run this vessel according to corporate directives, I will find a plant manager who can. Jim swallowed hard, looking at the massive steel reactor vessel. He had 4 years left until retirement, a mortgage to pay, and a daughter in college. "Fine," Jim muttered, turning toward the control room microphone. "We run it hot." At 10:00 a.m., the operators in Reactor Hall 3 began loading raw chemical precursors into Vessel 402. Thousands of gallons of silicone monomers, solvents, and cross-linking agents flowed through the stainless steel pipes into the reactor. Finally, the plant technicians hoisted a tote of the modified amino acid catalyst complex and pumped it directly into the mixture. The operators closed the charging port, engaged the mixing impellers, and opened the steam valves to heat the jacket. Inside Vessel 402, exactly what I had warned about on page 142 of my blue leather notebook, began to take place on a massive molecular scale. Without a continuous nitrogen gas purge to strip away atmospheric moisture, ambient humidity sealed inside the top of the reactor vessel reacted immediately with the amino acid backbone of the catalyst. As the reactor temperature climbed past 116 degrees Celsius, reaching the aggressive 128-degree target dictated by Arthur's office, the catalyst complex underwent rapid, catastrophic decarboxylation. The essential organometallic bonds shattered. The amino acid chains reconfigured into a degraded chemical variant, catalyst 9B. To the naked eye, nothing appeared wrong. Inside the main control room, the digital sensors showed normal pressure readings. The liquid inside Vessel 402 retained its clear, viscous appearance. When the 6-hour heating cycle ended, plant technicians drew a small quality assurance sample from the bottom valve and carried it to the on-site plant testing laboratory. The technician on duty applied a thin film of the cured liquid to a small steel test panel and ran standard, high-speed automated quality assurance checks. The initial baseline tests were deceptively positive. The cured film was smooth, clear, and displayed excellent initial water repellency. Because standard quality assurance protocols in factory settings were designed for basic quality control, checking for color, density, and immediate surface drying time, they did not simulate sustained oceanic shear forces, high hydrostatic pressure, or prolonged exposure to warm, salt-dense ocean currents over weeks of continuous operation. To the factory technicians, the batch appeared perfect. "Sample passes baseline QA," the technician wrote on the digital log sheet, stamping the batch approved for full-scale distribution. Over the next 3 weeks, the Canton manufacturing facility ran Vessel 402 around the clock, pushing reactor temperatures to 128 degrees and skipping nitrogen purges on every single run to make up for lost time. Tens of thousands of gallons of flawed, degraded SilcaShield-X were pumped into heavy industrial shipping totes, loaded onto flatbed semi-trucks, and dispatched to commercial shipyards across the globe. By late May, 8 massive commercial container ships owned by the Vanguard Maritime Group, including their brand-new $200 million flagship vessel, the Vanguard Monarch, were resting inside dry docks in Norfolk, Hamburg, and Singapore. Teams of industrial spray painters wearing respirators and protective suits worked around the clock, sandblasting the massive steel hulls down to bare metal, applying anti-corrosive primer, and coating thousands of square meters of submerged hull area with thick, gleaming layers of Apex's SilcaShield-X. From his executive corner office in Chicago, Arthur Pendelton watched the live video feeds of the finished vessels sliding down the dry dock ramps into the sea. He poured himself a glass of 20-year-old scotch, toasted his own framed portrait on the wall, and waited for his mid-year corporate performance bonus to clear the bank. He had no idea that beneath the waterline of 8 ocean-crossing megaships, 80,000 gallons of unstable, decarboxylated chemical paint were waiting for the open ocean to tear them apart. Part 5. The Pacific Degradation. The Vanguard Monarch left the commercial port of Yokohama, Japan, on June 4th, fully loaded with 11,000 steel shipping containers bound for the port of Long Beach, California. She was a marvel of modern naval architecture, 1,100 feet long, carrying over 140,000 displacement tons, and powered by a massive 12-cylinder marine diesel engine designed to run continuously across open ocean crossings. Standing on the bridge deck during the morning departure, Captain Eric Lindholm looked out across the glassy waters of Tokyo Bay. For the first 2 days of the Trans-Pacific voyage, the vessel performed flawlessly. Down in the ship's engine control room, Chief Engineer Lars Jensen monitored the digital telemetry screens with a quiet sense of satisfaction. The freshly applied hull coating of Apex's SilcaShield-X seemed to be delivering on every corporate promise. The main engine fuel consumption readouts showed a 4% reduction in heavy fuel oil usage compared to the ship's baseline historical averages. Lars made a brief entry in the engineering log, noting smooth propulsion, low vibration parameters, and optimal shaft speed. By June 8th, the Vanguard Monarch entered the Northern Pacific Transit Corridor, 500 miles south of the Aleutian Islands. Here, the ocean was cold, dense, and churned by steady 20-knot surface winds and heavy ocean swells. At 400 hours on June 9th, the first subtle anomaly registered on the engine room monitoring systems. Chief Engineer Lars Jensen was sitting at his metal desk, drinking black coffee, when the automated fuel flow alarm sounded a low, repeating tone. He walked over to the primary console and tapped the digital diagnostic screen. The automatic fuel injection system had unexpectedly increased fuel delivery to the main cylinders by 6% over the past 4 hours, despite the bridge maintaining a constant engine speed of 92 revolutions per minute. Lars adjusted the fuel trim controls manually, but within 2 hours, the fuel draw climbed another 3%. "Bridge, this is engineering," Lars said, pressing the comms button on the wall console. "Captain, are you running into unexpected surface currents or heavy head seas up there?" "Negative, Lars," Captain Lindholm replied over the speaker. "Calm seas, 5-knot tailwind, clear skies all the way to the horizon. Why?" "Our fuel burn is climbing," Lars muttered, frowning at the digital gauges. "It feels like we're pulling an anchor." By June 11th, halfway across the Pacific, the subtle anomaly turned into an operational nightmare. The fuel burn rate had not merely increased, it had spiked by an unprecedented 34%. The massive diesel engines were roaring at maximum thermal capacity, burning through hundreds of extra metric tons of heavy fuel oil just to keep the vessel moving at a sluggish 14 knots. Severe, high-frequency vibrations began propagating up through the steel hull plates, shaking the engine room pipes, rattling the bridge windows, and causing structural alarm sensors to flash yellow across the main control board. Captain Lindholm had no choice. Fearing catastrophic shaft failure or complete engine seizure in open ocean, he ordered the ship to alter course toward the nearest deepwater commercial harbor equipped with dry dock facilities, the port of Busan, South Korea. While the Vanguard Monarch limped westward across the Pacific, identical distress calls began cascading into Vanguard Maritime Group's corporate headquarters in Rotterdam. In the North Sea, the Vanguard Titan experienced sudden fuel burn spikes and severe hull vibration while entering the English Channel. In the Indian Ocean, the Vanguard Enterprise lost 4 knots of cruising speed within 48 hours of leaving Singapore, its main engine coolant temperatures climbing into dangerous red zones. All 8 megavessels that had been freshly coated with Apex's SilcaShield-X were failing simultaneously across the globe. On June 14th, the Vanguard Monarch dropped its heavy anchor in the outer harbor of Busan. Vanguard Maritime dispatched an emergency marine casualty investigation team, led by senior marine surveyor Carl Berg, along with a commercial deep-sea diving crew. The diver, equipped with high-definition underwater video cameras and powerful LED lighting rigs, rolled off the side of the launch boat and descended into the murky, green harbor waters beside the massive steel hull of the Monarch. Inside the harbor office, Carl Berg and Captain Lindholm watched the live video feed on a daylight-treatable monitor screen. Descending to 10 meters, the diver's voice crackled through the radio speaker. "Approaching midship hull plates now. Wait, what in the world is this?" The video feed cleared as the diver brought his heavy underwater lights within 2 feet of the steel hull. Carl Berg leaned forward, staring at the monitor in absolute disbelief. The smooth, glassy, crystal-clear surface of SilcaShield-X was completely gone. In its place was a hideous, thick gray mass that looked like half-cured rubber paste. Under the continuous, high-velocity shear forces of open ocean transit and the immense pressure of ocean water, the decarboxylated, flawed chemical bonds of catalyst 9B had suffered total structural collapse. The polymer matrix had not simply washed away. It had undergone an extensive chemical transformation, absorbing seawater, expanding in volume, and degrading into a sticky, tar-like chemical sludge. As the vessel had moved through the sea, that sticky sludge had acted like giant strips of flypaper across thousands of square meters of hull surface. Millions of ocean microparticles, sand, floating ocean debris, and dense clusters of juvenile barnacles had become embedded deep inside the tacky, degrading coating. Instead of creating a zero-friction surface, the degraded paint had created a rough, abrasive, drag-generating nightmare that increased hydrodynamic drag by over 40%. "It looks like thick gray glue," the diver reported, reaching out with a gloved hand. He pressed his index finger into the hull coating. The material yielded like warm clay, leaving a deep, ragged gouge. "It's soft, Captain. I can peel it right off the steel with my thumbnail, and it's completely filled with trapped grit and ocean debris." Carl Berg stepped back from the monitor screen, his face white with rage. "That isn't marine paint," Carl said, his voice trembling with anger. "That is an 80,000-gallon chemical disaster attached to $85 million worth of commercial shipping." He immediately pulled out his satellite phone and dialed Vanguard Maritime's chief executive officer and executive board in Rotterdam. "Shut down the entire fleet," Carl said the moment the CEO answered. "Order all 8 SilcaShield-X coated vessels to dock immediately. Apex Chemical didn't sell us a revolutionary polymer. They painted our ships with uncured chemical sludge." The financial fallout was instantaneous and staggering. Vanguard Maritime was losing $1.2 million per day in direct charter penalties, delayed cargo fees, emergency fuel surcharges, and dry dock booking costs for every single day their 8 megavessels remained stranded in harbor. Insurance underwriters immediately issued global freeze orders on the affected ships, forbidding them from entering international sea lanes until their hulls were completely sandblasted down to bare steel and recoated. Back in Chicago, the 5th floor of Apex Chemical Synthetics descended into complete chaos. The polished walnut hallways that had been so quiet and pristine 3 weeks ago were now filled with screaming executives, frantic legal assistants running between offices, and constant, ringing telephone lines from marine attorneys in London, Rotterdam, and Tokyo. Arthur Pendelton locked himself inside his corner office. His expensive wool jacket was hanging over the back of his chair. His silk tie was loosened at his collar, and his hands were shaking violently as he stared at his computer monitor. On the screen was a formal legal notice from Vanguard Maritime Group's lead litigation counsel. Vanguard was filing an emergency international arbitration claim against Apex for $140 million in direct damages, breach of contract, and commercial fraud. Arthur grabbed his desk phone and dialed the Canton manufacturing plant, screaming at Jim Kozlowski the moment the line connected. "What did you do to that batch, Jim?" Arthur roared, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Did your operators contaminate the raw mixing tanks? Did you use spoiled solvents?" Jim Kozlowski's voice came back over the line, completely flat, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. "We ran the vessel at 128 degrees Celsius without a nitrogen purge, Mr. Pendelton," Jim said clearly. "Exactly according to the corporate directive, stamped with your office's red urgent authorization mark. I have your signed memo pinned right here on my control room bulletin board." Arthur slammed the phone down onto its receiver, pulling at his hair as a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He realized with sickening clarity that the technical trap had sprung. He had taken a specialized, highly delicate chemical breakthrough, stripped away the inventor, ignored the trade secret protocols, and forced it through a mass-production meat grinder to line his own pockets. And now, halfway across the world in Rotterdam, the bill was coming due. Part 6. The Rotterdam Confrontation. The central headquarters of Vanguard Maritime Group sat on the banks of the river Nieuw Maas in Rotterdam, housed inside a striking steel and glass tower overlooking Europe's largest seaport. On the morning of July 2nd, the 20th floor executive boardroom did not feel like a place of routine commerce. It felt like an international courtroom assembled for an execution. Around the perimeter of a 30-foot granite conference table sat 24 high-ranking individuals. On one side sat Vanguard's executive board, flanked by international maritime arbitrators, senior marine surveyors, and maritime casualty attorneys. At the head of the table sat Dr. Henrik Lindqvist, Vanguard's chief technology officer, a sharp, gray-haired Swedish naval engineer whose reputation for absolute technical perfection was feared across global shipping lanes. On the opposite side of the table sat Arthur Pendelton and Julia Sterling. Arthur looked ghastly. His face was pale, heavy dark circles hung beneath his eyes, and his tailored suit looked slightly too large for him, as if he had lost weight over the preceding 2 weeks of intense panic. Julia Sterling sat beside him with a rigid spine, her posture stiff and defensive, surrounded by 3 binders of Apex's corporate compliance paperwork and non-liability disclaimers. Arthur cleared his throat, opening a velvet folder with trembling hands. "Dr. Lindqvist, members of the board," Arthur began, his voice lacking its usual smooth executive cadence. "Apex Chemical Synthetics regrets the operational disruptions experienced by the Vanguard fleet over the past 3 weeks. However, our preliminary internal investigation suggests that these hull coating failures were not caused by any inherent defect in SilcaShield-X." Henrik Lindqvist leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms. He did not say a word. He simply stared at Arthur with cold, calculating eyes. Julia Sterling leaned forward, taking over the speaking role. "Our legal team has documented severe procedural anomalies at the Norfolk, Hamburg, and Busan shipyards. The environmental humidity levels during application exceeded standard parameters. Furthermore, local shipyard crews failed to clean the hull steel down to white metal standards before applying our coating. Apex cannot be held financially responsible for third-party contractor negligence during application." Julia slid a stack of legal briefs across the granite table. "We are prepared to offer a 10% credit on future polymer orders," Arthur added quickly, trying to force a confident executive smile. "Provided Vanguard withdraws its emergency arbitration filing and allows Apex's technical crew to reapply the coating under controlled conditions." Dr. Lindqvist did not touch the legal briefs. He did not even glance down at them. Instead, he slowly looked toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the boardroom. "Mr. Pendelton, Miss Sterling," Dr. Lindqvist said, his voice deep, calm, and carrying the quiet weight of absolute authority. "Vanguard Maritime does not make multi-million-dollar operational decisions based on corporate excuses or legal deflection. When 80,000 tons of commercial shipping fails simultaneously on 3 different oceans, we do not ask salesmen what happened. We ask scientists." Dr. Lindqvist raised his hand and gestured toward the door. "Allow me to introduce our independent technical consultant on marine polymer degradation," Lindqvist announced. "Dr. Alina Vance." The heavy oak doors clicked open. Arthur's head snapped around so fast a sharp pop echoed from his neck. Julia Sterling gasped, her mouth dropping open as her pen slipped from her fingers and clattered against the granite table. I walked into the boardroom. I was wearing a dark charcoal suit, carrying my leather satchel over my shoulder, and holding a thin metal briefcase in my right hand. Behind me walked Dr. Alastair Finch, Vice President of R&D at Marine Coatings International, along with 2 European Union environmental auditors carrying certified laboratory testing equipment. I did not look at Arthur. I did not look at Julia. I walked straight to the presenter's podium at the head of the granite table, placed my briefcase down, and opened it. "Alina," Arthur stammered, his voice rising an octave in pure, unadulterated panic. "What is this? Dr. Lindqvist, this woman is a former disgruntled employee of Apex. She was terminated for gross corporate misconduct and trade secret violations. She is legally barred by a strict non-compete clause from participating in." "Silence, Mr. Pendelton," Dr. Lindqvist barked, slamming his palm flat onto the table with a crack like a pistol shot. "This is an international maritime arbitration hearing, not an Apex staff meeting. You will sit there and you will listen." I plugged my encrypted storage drive into the boardroom presentation console. High-resolution chemical spectra, 3D molecular renders, and process flow diagrams instantly projected across 4 giant digital screens lining the boardroom walls. "Good morning, members of the board," I said, my voice steady, clear, and resonant. "For the past 3 weeks, my team at Marine Coatings International, in conjunction with certified independent laboratories in Rotterdam and Tokyo, has conducted full molecular forensics on hull samples taken directly from the Vanguard Monarch, the Vanguard Titan, and the Vanguard Enterprise." I pressed a button on the remote. The first screen displayed 2 side-by-side chemical mass spectrometry graphs. "On the left," I explained, pointing to the green line, "is the true, fully cross-linked molecular structure of SilcaShield-X. When synthesized correctly, the polymer relies on a specialized organometallic complex known as Catalyst 9. To achieve true cross-linking without inducing side reactions, Catalyst 9 must be synthesized at a precise thermal window of 114.5 degrees Celsius under a continuous high-purity nitrogen gas purge to exclude atmospheric moisture." I looked directly at Arthur, whose face had turned from pale white to a mottled, sickly red. "On the right," I continued, pointing to the jagged red line on the screen, "is the chemical structure extracted from the sludge currently peeling off the hull of the Vanguard Monarch. You will notice a complete absence of stable silicone cross-linking. Instead, the spectra reveals high concentrations of a degraded, carboxylated amino acid variant, Catalyst 9b. The boardroom was dead silent. Every single Vanguard executive and maritime attorney was leaning forward, hanging on every word. "Catalyst 9b is not a paint," I said flatly. "It is a chemical time bomb. When exposed to ocean shear stress and hydrostatic pressure, it absorbs water, expands by 40%, and transforms into an abrasive, sticky gel that traps ocean debris and increases hull drag by over 42%. Julia Sterling stood up, her face tight with desperation. "This is theoretical speculation. Dr. Vance is attempting to sabotage Apex to cover her own past professional failures. You have no proof that Apex manufactured this batch incorrectly. I don't need theoretical speculation, Miss Sterling, I replied smoothly, because I have subpoena record 402. I tapped the remote control again. The screen shifted to reveal a high-definition photograph of the official manufacturing log from Apex's Canton, Ohio facility, dated May 4th. Stamped clearly in bright red ink across the top of the batch sheet was the executive directive. Run at 128 degrees C, omit nitrogen purge per CTO office. Directly beneath the stamp was Arthur Pendelton's electronic executive signature. A sharp collective intake of breath echoed through the Vanguard executive board. To hit your quarterly volume metrics and secure Vanguard's $85 million, I said, looking Arthur dead in the eye, you ran vessel 402-14 degrees too hot. You skipped the nitrogen purge to save $4,000 per run. You destroyed the catalyst before the paint ever touched a container ship, and you lied to your own factory technicians about its stability. Arthur looked as if he was about to vomit. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Dr. Henrik Lindqvist stood up from his chair. The Swedish engineer looked down at Arthur with pure, unadulterated contempt. Mr. Pendelton, Lindqvist said, his voice dropping into a register of cold iron. You came into this boardroom today and attempted to blame simple, hard-working shipyard painters in Norfolk and Hamburg for your own catastrophic executive incompetence. Lindqvist turned to Vanguard's chief legal officer, sitting beside him. Cancel the Apex contract immediately, Lindqvist ordered. Execute the $140 million default penalty clause. File formal criminal fraud complaints with the United States Department of Justice and international maritime regulators against Mr. Pendelton personally. Julia Sterling sank back into her chair, her hands trembling as she closed her leather binders. She knew her legal career was over. Assisting an executive in concealing manufacturing defects to push through a fraudulent contract was grounds for immediate disbarment and federal indictment. Lindqvist then turned to me, his stern face softening into a warm, respectful smile. He extended his hand across the table. Dr. Vance, Lindqvist said, I understand you are now leading the Marine Polymer Division at Marine Coatings International. I am Dr. Lindqvist, I replied, shaking his hand. How quickly can your team deliver 80,000 gallons of your new Aegis Hydro polymer to our dry docks? The first shipment is already loaded on transports in Pittsburgh, Dr. Lindqvist, I smiled. Synthesized at room temperature, fully cross-linked and ready for sea trials. Lindqvist nodded slowly, a satisfied grin breaking across his face. Then, Vanguard is proud to award Marine Coatings International our exclusive 10-year global fleet contract. I looked over at Arthur Pendelton. He was sitting motionless in his chair, staring blankly at the projected batch log on the wall. His corner office, his $3,000 suits, his corporate buzzwords, and his stolen glory had all evaporated into thin air. I slung my leather satchel over my shoulder, picked up my briefcase, and walked out of the boardroom into the bright Dutch sunlight. Part 7. Total collapse and the final equation. The fallout from the Rotterdam arbitration hearing hit the global financial markets like a freight train on Monday morning. Before the opening bell rung on Wall Street, Vanguard Maritime Group formally issued a press release announcing the immediate termination of its $85 million contract with Apex Chemical Synthetics. Attached to the announcement was a scathing statement from Dr. Henrik Lindqvist detailing deliberate process falsification, gross corporate negligence, and the filing of a $140 million breach of contract lawsuit in international court. By 10:00 a.m., trading of Apex Chemical stock was halted on the New York Stock Exchange after the share price plummeted 68% in less than 45 minutes. Financial news anchors scrambled to explain how a rising darling of the industrial chemicals sector had evaporated overnight. Wall Street analysts who had praised Arthur Pendelton as a managerial genius 3 months prior were now openly calling the SilcaShield-X failure one of the most catastrophic corporate R&D frauds in modern manufacturing history. The regulatory hammer fell immediately after the stock collapse. Federal marshals and inspectors from the Environmental Protection Agency arrived at Apex's headquarters in Chicago with federal search warrants. They seized corporate servers, email archives, fifth-floor executive communication logs, and every batch record housed inside the Canton, Ohio manufacturing plant. Arthur Pendelton's descent was swift and absolute. He was stripped of his Chief Technology Officer title by an emergency vote of the Apex Board of Directors before the sun set on Tuesday. The board did not offer him a resignation package, severance, or corporate legal defense. Within 48 hours, federal prosecutors unsealed a multi-count indictment against Arthur personally, charging him with wire fraud, corporate securities fraud, and making false statements to federal inspectors. His prized corner office on the 5th floor was locked with heavy yellow evidence tape. The tailored wool suits and custom cufflinks could not protect him from facing potential federal prison time. Julia Sterling fared no better. The State Bar Association opened an immediate formal investigation into her conduct regarding the coerced termination of my employment, the suppression of internal technical warnings, and her bad faith litigation threats. Her license to practice law was suspended pending formal disbarment proceedings, and she found herself named as a co-defendant in multiple shareholder derivative lawsuits. Unable to absorb the catastrophic financial weight of Vanguard's lawsuit, the recall of tens of thousands of paint gallons, and the instant evaporation of its market value, Apex Chemical Synthetics declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy by the end of the month. The company's assets were dismantled and sold off at auction to pay legal creditors and shipyard remediation bills. The once vaunted 5th floor in Chicago was cleared out, standing empty and deserted. 6 months later, the sky over the port of Rotterdam was a clear, brilliant blue. I stood on the elevated observation deck of the primary maritime terminal alongside Dr. Henrik Lindqvist and Dr. Alastair Finch. Cold ocean air blew off the North Sea, carrying the familiar, sharp scent of salt water and deep harbor tides. Below us, floating gracefully in the harbor basin, rested the Vanguard Monarch. Over the past 4 months, the giant container ship had undergone extensive hull restoration. Teams of commercial specialists had sandblasted away every square inch of Apex's degraded gray sludge, restoring the raw steel plates before applying 3 coats of Marine Coatings International's Aegis Hydro Polymer. The ship had just completed its intensive sea trials across the North Sea. 4 days of continuous, maximum velocity ocean transit designed to stress test the new hull coating under severe marine conditions. Henrik Lindqvist held a thick stack of certified telemetry reports in his hands. He looked down at the data, a wide, genuine smile breaking across his weathered face. "Elena," Lindqvist said, turning to me and handing over the top telemetry sheet. "Look at line 4. I looked down at the sensor readouts. During 4 days of heavy seas, the Vanguard Monarch had recorded a 0.003 friction coefficient across all submerged hull sections. Fuel consumption had dropped by an unprecedented 12% below historical baseline figures, saving Vanguard thousands of tons of heavy fuel oil per ocean crossing, while completely eliminating toxic copper runoff into marine ecosystems. "Aegis Hydro didn't just meet our specs," Alastair Finch said, resting a hand on my shoulder. "It redefined what commercial shipping can achieve. The European Maritime Board just approved Aegis Hydro as the standard eco-coating for all incoming Atlantic fleets." As I watched the Vanguard Monarch slowly pull away from the dock to begin her transatlantic run to New York, I reached into my leather satchel and pulled out my old blue leather lab notebook. The cover was slightly scuffed at the corners, but the binding remained strong. I turned to page 140, looking down at the handwritten chemical equations, thermal curves, and nitrogen flow parameters I had penned during those solitary, exhausting midnight hours in Bay 4. Corporate executives like Arthur Pendelton spent their entire careers believing that science was merely an asset to be manipulated, that chemical reality could be altered by executive directives, aggressive legal intimidation, polished buzzwords, and quarterly profit metrics. They believed that the person who held the title owned the truth. But chemistry does not care about executive titles. Physics does not yield to corporate boardrooms. A chemical bond either holds or it breaks based on the immutable laws of nature, regardless of how much money rests on the outcome. In the end, Arthur had built a skyscraper of lies on a foundation of altered numbers and stolen credit. When the ocean applied its honest, unforgiving pressure, his false kingdom crumbled into sludge. I slid the blue notebook back into my satchel, pulled my wool coat tight against the sea breeze, and smiled as the giant ship glided silently across the water, effortlessly slicing through the ocean waves.